With the 2024 general election just weeks away, political advertising is once again overwhelming our lives. And at Brkthru, we want to revisit the effects these campaigns have on local advertisers and agencies. Our first political podcast this summer caught your attention, racking up nearly 7,000 views. So we've invited our digital media experts, Matt Zornes, Director of Sales Development, and Morgan Stroyeck, Manager of Strategy, back for an update. I recall Morgan and Matt telling us that this year's advertising spend on political would top a record $12 billion. Non-political marketers, ad agencies, and advertisers are struggling with how to maintain a share of voice and stand out from all of that noise during yet another frantic political season. Matt and Morgan, what gives?
Thanks, Jeff. Welcome back to 30 Minutes with Brkthru. I'm Matt Zornes.
I'm Morgan Stroyeck.
And we are back again to talk round two of political, Morgan. Somehow we keep ending up in this position talking about this topic. But again, I think we said it last time, exciting and important one for everybody right now.
Yeah, I don't think we're surprised to be here still talking about this. It's as important as ever. And we're kind of getting into that crunch time in terms of the election cycle. So there's plenty to talk about.
It's coming quicker than we know it. I feel like we blink and it'll be here. So by the time this episode's out, we'll be even closer than we are to that finish line. So in today's episode, we hope to kind of just talk briefly about some of the information we shared last episode and maybe some quick updates to those numbers. Not really, but just a little more discussion on some of the topics we covered. And then again, we want to hit some more actionable insights at the end for non-political advertisers. So that'll be a big focus for us as well. But Morgan, I mean, let's just jump right into it. I mean, we said we'd kind of comb through some of the things we talked about on that last episode. What's going on with the numbers? What's the state of the numbers? How is it looking from where we last spoke?
Yeah, not too different overall for the year. So still hanging out a little bit over 12 billion for political advertising spending. I'd say that it's up from where it was in 2022. Which was about 10 million. So that would have been like midterm elections and everything. And then it was around 9.57 billion in 2020. So, still that 3 billion spread from 2020, but overall for 2024, we're not going to see that number increase too much more. I will say that in that split, we talked about how a little over a quarter is going to go to digital. So not all of that is going to be digital, which is good news for many of our clients, many digital advertisers. A lot of it will still go into linear and traditional channels. And then in that digital, Meta is still going to heavily benefit from the spending. They're going to see about 568 million in political ad revenues, and Google's going to get about another 550 million from political ads. So the duopoly is still reigning supreme when it comes to the spending.
Yeah, no, the duopoly is right. And again, I don't think either of those places are a shock to us. Like those were channels we kind of addressed, between Google's rich first party or rich data sets. And again, the environment that is Meta, like nothing on there shocks us. No. Is there anything though that maybe stood out that did surprise you or seemed a little strange as you were combing through any numbers this year? Because I mean, I had one, but I didn't want to.
I will just say, staying with Google and Meta a little bit, it is interesting. Like, I kind of downplayed how much that's not different seeing them take a lot of the spend, but it's something like 1 in every 3 political ad dollars is going to be spent with those two platforms. So just keep in mind, overall, we talk about that the total digital number is not huge in terms of all ad spend in 2024. But if you still look at that chunk, a lot of it is going to go into those platforms. And we think about just the timeline being condensed. That's where that money is not a large dollar amount, but in a small time frame.
Right.
That's why it does still matter. That's why we still, track it, talk about it, think about it.
Yeah. And we may come up on that later too, just like that short time frame. We touched on that last time, but it is funny. Just like really, we look at sometimes spins or like year on year and annual basis. And when you look at how compressed this is, I mean, again, that the number just hits different, as they say. What stood out to me, what was funny was, even though the duopoly, as you said, is going to count for 1 in 3 of those digital dollars, when you look at that total US political spend, that's still only 1 in 10 of the dollars, right? When we look at the total spend going to, and that part still stood out to me, as these numbers are staggering and they're huge in the compressed timelines. But when you still look at that total pie that goes toward political advertising, it's still, those two duopolies still don't even make a, basically they're like a tenth, of it on average. That is just crazy to say out loud after we just said 1 in 3 of the digital dollars. So,
right. And I think we really drove this point home, I think, in the first talk, that if you are thinking about your TV buys, that's where you're going to feel more of the squeeze in terms of what's coming. Digital, there's already a lot of options in terms of inventory and shifting flexibility that we've talked about. So all of that does insulate digital spend even more. On top of that, there is also just going to be less spend, right? It's only 1 in $3 as opposed to, overall you said 1 in 10 is going to digital. So it's a lot less. And then there are a lot more options and flexibility. So those two things together, I think, are still our key call outs.
Yeah, no, and again, nothing's really, like you said, changed that much from that today. And I don't think that'll change in the next set of cycles either, right? I think some of those things will hold to be true as we go on. I would say that the other piece of this too is that we know that DSPs are seeing that, right? On the digital side, they are seeing an increase, right? There are certain big DSPs within the industry that they had a projection of what they expected to make this year, right? They understood what the digital pie could be from the projections, and they're earning a little bit more than they expected. And again, since we last met, there has been a change to one of the parties, which again, after that change happened, that's when some of that uptick began in some of the DSPs. So I do think we even said that, like, we don't know what's going to happen, after our first episode was recorded. And
we did not anticipate that. No one could have called that.
Right. On short notice, we have a political change, right? A major candidate change for a major party. And again, those are the things that we said, oh, we're going to happen. But even the incremental lift there, it's not nearly as much of an impact as the traditional. So just tying it back to what you were talking about. Yes, there's been a little bit more an influx of dollars, but a lot of that is still landing in those traditional linear spaces. But the digital channels are still seeing those lifts. So it's not, it's all tides are rising on that front.
Absolutely. And I don't think, come the next presidential election cycle, probably we will still just see incremental increases. I think CTV will continue to own a little bit more from the linear spend, but it's not going to be huge. It's not going to drop off. And so linear just is kind of here to stay. Obviously, they're benefiting from the bump they get in an election year. And, next year, they likely will see a lot of changes as that interest falls off. But yeah, so the majority of spend, or the majority of that, I guess we could say new spend with the party changes, it's not really new money. It's just more, again, in a smaller timeline. Most of that's still going to go to linear channels.
So as we think again about all the different channels, linear impacts, the spend impacts, digital, traditional, all the things, I want to get a little bit more myopic into digital here for a moment. I want to drill down a little bit, and there are impacts. There are cost increases that hit the digital side of things. Again, political drives change there.
Right.
But it's really not as much of a change as one would think. So I guess I'll tee you up there. I'll let you kind of jump in and explain a little bit more.
Yeah, I think we covered that ground pretty well in terms of linear is going to feel it the most. Social is definitely going to feel it, price increases. Meta is not one to leave money on the table. A lot of money is going to go there naturally. And then, like you said, the content around or happening on the platform is going to draw even more from political spenders. So that you will just naturally feel a little bit more of the cost increase when you're running ads on Meta and Instagram. However, CTV is one area where we've made that case that that's going to get a lot of the digital spend from political. However, we're not going to see that really high prices the way that you might anticipate, just because by nature it being CTV and having so many inventory sources and areas to pivot into, I think it's a little more insulated than something like social, where it, there's only really one Meta, as much as others try to, take some of that share. But with CTV, there are so many areas to put that, whether it's ad supported or free ad supported streaming services, or if it's premium. There are a lot of avenues and flexibility in that. So I think we will really only see, I believe it was a Trade Desk article said about a $2 increase on the monthly CPM range. Which
when you think about a $2 increase on a CPM, I mean, that's nothing. Again, it is something. It is worth something. but that's, pales in comparison to what you might see on a traditional side, on a radio or a TV side. You may see 30, 40, 50, 60, 100% increases on some of the same inventory with increased ad space, with longer commercial break pods and things. So the inventory is as big as it's ever been, and the rate is as high as it's ever been. It just seems absurd sometimes. So to hear that maybe there's a 12% delta, a couple bucks that is impacted in the CTV side, that's, again, that should make you feel good about placing dollars there, whether you're a non-political advertiser or a political advertiser.
Right.
But you know what is funny too, and I was thinking about that, is that from the consumer perspective, all this fragmentation of connected TV has kind of become, it's rationalized a lot, but it has been a little bit of an annoyance, right? Where everything's fragmented. If I want to find a show, I got to go here. Well, now that's
literally, you
moved.
have to Google,
You have to
which
Google,
platform it's
and then
on.
it
Yeah,
moves. It's
yeah,
like, oh, well, that's no longer on Netflix. That's and so it becomes this fragmentation. But on accident, that fragmentation has helped the industry keep those costs, right? Like you're saying, that fragmentation is the reason that CTV is kind of protected in that sense.
Right.
So it's just so funny to think that a frustration on the consumer end provides a benefit on the advertiser end, but that it did kind of work out that way.
In this case, in this short timeline, there might actually be a benefit to the consumer because they know that they can go to maybe a service that doesn't have as much ad load, isn't putting more placements in there. Even the CTV, that's something to bear in mind, that the different platforms have different kind of ad loads, different placements throughout the programming that you're watching. So all of that does impact your audience in a normal time, but then in an election time, you still have to be aware that, okay, my CPM is not skyrocketing. Great. However, I still have to think about the audience experience and what other content might be running alongside my placements. So like that's still relevant. We talked about that in our first episode, that be aware of what other messaging is out there and that your audience is exposed to. But you're
right. And it's funny because it kind of pushes me to another thought. And that's, I think when we're considering what the audience experience is and the messaging and all these things, we would assume that in times like this, consumer spending is probably going to go backwards. So if you're a non-political advertiser, I think the anecdotal approach would be, there's too much noise, there's too much spend. No one wants to do anything. Everyone's hiding under a rock. No one spends any money. But I honestly was surprised that there was a study that's been ongoing from the National Association of Realtors since 1977. And they're looking at every year, October, November, for every, political and non-political election year. So every 2 years, they've been measuring this thing. Now, again, it's not 100% promise, but when you look at everything on the macro level, we're talking a 1.8 to 2.8 increase in consumer confidence based on the Consumer Confidence Index. But consumers gain confidence, oddly enough. And I think, again, not to color your thoughts too much, but again, whether that's someone who maybe they're like, I'm going to spend all my money and have fun before everything changes or it's, man, there's all sorts of great stuff coming on the horizon. I'm going to start spending. It doesn't matter what side of the coin you're on. It can drive you there. And I think, again, when I think of it for my own self, that makes sense. So anyway, I know that was long-winded by my part, but just, does that make sense to you? Do you think that, the people should still try to reach their target audience right now?
Oh, definitely. I think, that's a great point that I would love to dive into. Like, what's the psychology behind people wanting to continue spending? Is it, like you said, seeing all the changes that they might really align with that are coming based on, which political party they hope wins in the election cycle? Like, there's a lot, I think, that is interesting there. However, we've talked a lot about noise, engagement, how much people are seeing, how much is out there, and whether or not someone really wants to hear it or see it or be engaged with it. I do think there might be like a natural pull to be paying more attention to advertisements, whether it is political or non-political. So I do think like people are just listening a little more intently during an election cycle. Again, that is anecdotal. That is my opinion, that people, whether or not they want to remember it or see it, they are. Right? It's inorganic content that they can't necessarily avoid, that the algorithm's putting in front of them, whether it's paid based on their own engagement ads that they would normally see, or whether it is political, which they have the big butts, they're going to try and get in front of the people that they want to get in front of. As in, I think about myself as a consumer, I am listening to it. So whether I'm scrolling past it or commenting on something, I am just a little bit more aware of what I'm seeing. So I think that non-political advertisers can also benefit from that your audience is very active right now. They're on all these platforms. We know that engagement's high when it comes to like news content. So you can sort of ride that wave with your own spending. And then I think what you shared also bolsters that there is spend associated with that engagement, with that consumer intent during this time period. So we would never say pause your advertising during an election cycle anyway. That's not how campaigns run, right? We know that soon the months will be behind us and you still want to have the data from those months. So you would never like pack up and go home.
And algorithms are real, right?
But I think there's actually a benefit to continuing to leaning into the fact that people are on these platforms and engaging. They are sitting in front of their CTVs, consuming all of those services. So just figuring out how to align your campaign goals, your business goals with that media consumption, I think is more important than ever. So yeah, I stand by don't stop. Just figure out how to adjust into what's happening as we, finish out the cycle.
No, I love that. And it was funny as we were kind of preparing for this episode and talking through some things. And I was thinking about those changes in media consumption. And I was considering, what is like kind of the buckets of the consumer. And again, this is not my comprehensive list, right? But there's folks that are leaning in, right? Like you said, they're increasing their news consumption, right? Whether that be through traditional means or through social channels, but they want to lean in. They're trying to, again, follow the information, follow the news, but they're engaged, like you said. That means they're locked into everything they're scrolling through on their phone. It's not a passive social experience. So you still can reach them. They're listening different, like you said. They're leaned in, not just to political news. They're just leaned into the device different.
Right. Yes.
Right. And so they're on that front. Now, there are folks that are leaning away. And what I mean by that is that they're going to socials. And again, they're trying to turn off the political ads in their brain, right? As they're scrolling as quickly as they can past those, and they're trying to escape to other content within that social environment, but they're still in that social environment and you can't escape it. So you're kind of getting some ancillary. So you're leaning away, right? You're not leaning in, you're leaning just a little bit away, but you're still kind of in the mix. And then the other one, I don't know if this is the best way to say it, but I call it running away. Some people that are escaping to long form content, they're escaping to premium streaming apps so they can watch a whole movie without interruption, without any commercial breaks in between. And sometimes engaging in that free ad supported content where, again, they will have to consume some ads, but the intent in their head is running away. And again, you can't necessarily run away from all the ads. But again, regardless of each of those kind of buckets, right? Each consumer is going to have a different change. And I think to set that up is important before we kind of talk about ad engagement here in a second. So any other thoughts there on the changes in media consumption?
I don't know. I think that you kind of spelled out those buckets really well. I think we all can identify where we might be in one of those buckets. It stands that, media, particularly digital media, is such a part of everybody's life, so that, we're all going to get through this election cycle. It's just about thinking around your specific audience and what that might mean for them, right? Are they leaning in? Are they leaning away? Are they running away? How might that change how you want to reach them? But, to go back to how we started this section, I'd say they are still intent. The money is still there to be spent.
Exactly.
Certain categories continue to do really well during, an election cycle. So I'd say things like consumer goods. We're still seeing people really engaged with spending there on household items, maybe more essential goods than luxury goods, but there's still spend to be driven in terms of, continuing your advertising, get your consumers to engage and then act with their dollars. I will say this timing, I'm one of those who's thinking about travel and next year's travel plan. So this is also
already
time
booking that next year. Huh? Already thinking about
it. You're already thinking ahead. You're thinking past like the political noise, the chaotic election cycle. We said that consumer confidence is still there. So some people are already thinking about, okay, what's my next trip? What's the next thing I want to do? Or, other verticals that we see that are still having consumers really interested in spending would be like financial services. As you hear that noise about what's going to happen with the economy, what might change in the upcoming years, we could see people interested in reaching out, financial advisors, opening up a high yield savings account. These are verticals that I think are still particularly important to continue spending throughout the cycle. Again, I say everybody should continue, but those in particular, I think consumers are actively listening, but they're specifically thinking about what those verticals have to offer.
That's right. And I love that you covered those because and again, I think that's just a small subset of other
Mhm.
categories, right? Those are some to
Right.
highlight, but there's other categories again that all kind of carry that same tune. But when you think about, okay, I've got to continue to advertise. These are
Mhm.
maybe you're in one of those categories, and you're like, yes, I got to
Right.
keep on. It, do what should you be considering? And I do think we put some thought into that and said, obviously, as we go into this season, right? One, we think about kind of that leaning in, leaning away, running away. I
Yeah.
think that's a good
Mhm.
thought exercise to understand about what your audience is. What kind of political messaging are they being inundated with
Mhm.
within the channel that you're trying to reach them in? And you understand kind of the challenge that you have to overcome. So just a couple quick tips, I think, on that front that
Yeah.
can apply to anybody. I think we should share a couple of these. Are one thing you brought up when we were talking in advance of this was understanding the timing of the debates, right?
Mhm.
Digital affords you to be a little bit more surgical on being able to kind of turn things off for a day or two of the week, or
Mhm.
certain day parts where you want to avoid your message being out there getting lost in those some of those prime time windows per se if you're in certain environments. um but that one stood out to me where
Mhm.
that is something I think we often need to keep our eye on things like that. It's not just necessarily the debates themselves, but as you get closer to the election, coverage ramps up.
Mhm.
The amount of information ramps up that we receive. So I thought that one stood out to me of like just kind of keeping your eye on the cycle and where those spikes are coming, and consider, right, maybe pausing, consider
Mhm.
changing messaging, consider changing some targeting on those days, weeks, etc. Do
Right.
you think that makes sense?
Absolutely. Again, my background is as a media trader, so day parting and bidding up or down on certain times of day or days of week is already a natural thing that you're looking at when you're optimizing your campaigns. For display, that's something that's just gonna be part and parcel of managing a campaign. But when you have all of this external noise or happening or these other things just in the ecosystem, I think it's more important than ever to lean into those tools and the flexibility that you have. It is programmatic, it is automatic, so it's not a heavy lift to try to adjust your campaigns. Maybe it's tough if you're doing it at scale across all your campaigns, but for a lot of small medium sized advertisers, I think this is something you should be working with your team on, considering how to tailor your campaign delivery during these few months. It's not forever. And when we talk about pauses, we are just talking about those short breaks. So
Yeah,
that could
I
be a
would
few
say
hours,
I
a
I
day.
was trying
Yeah.
to emphasize like a day or two, or
Right.
like
Yeah.
a day, like a couple hours. But yeah,
It might,
honestly,
it might like, you might think, okay, well, why not just run through it? But the truth is save your money and it will be more impactful if you can tailor to those debates, those elections that are happening, the noise that comes with them. For
yeah, I
sure.
mean, advertising budgets are holy, right? And
Mhm.
they're so important to everyone, no matter the size. But especially if you're a smaller advertiser, that budget really is important to you. So
Mhm.
when you look at an annual budget, you're just not, again, we're talking about a couple month window where you
Yeah.
might just want to be more strategic with reducing or just slowing down a little bit.
Mhm.
But I think we all know you never want to go completely dark for too long, because again, you
Right.
lose momentum with the consumer. But I joked about it earlier, but I really meant it, is that algorithms are real. And a lot of these platforms and a lot of your media campaigns, as they run in the digital side, the longer they run, the smarter they get. And so when we
Yeah.
lose those learnings, when we have those long pauses, it can cause like a downstream ripple effect to the
Mhm.
performance. Can, right? I'm not saying it
Right.
will, but it just creates a potential of a challenge that shouldn't be there.
Yeah, I think another way to protect against some of that is not necessarily to even pause, depending on what it is. Think about like Meta. Maybe I don't want to shut off because I know there's a lot of engagement and I still want to capitalize on it, like we talked about. But so that might be a case where you adjust your bids, or maybe you adjust your targeting a little bit so that you're trying to um, get a slightly different piece of the pie for maybe a little bit less than your typical targeting. Like, again, flexibility is key. Base it on data and your goals. It's not all or nothing. It's never all or nothing. Just figure
Right.
out how to tailor it to what you need.
Yeah. So, Morgan, I think we're kind of coming close up on time. And one thing that I think you're talking about is optimization, right?
Yes.
You're giving an example of an optimization
Mhm.
that's happening kind of on that media trader level, on that bidding level. But I think that's really the key here is,
Yeah.
it's digital affords you that opportunity to not just see the data signals externally, but you have the ability to apply those to
Mhm.
live campaigns and to and to see those impact your marketing goal
Yeah.
by being more strategic and thinking a little bit differently over the next couple months about where your audience is, what they're being inundated with, what channel you're trying to advertise in and the spend impacts, et cetera. But optimization is what we're talking about, right?
Absolutely. I think at the end of the day, it comes down to that most granular level, and that is where you have the control. So we can talk about these big impacts or the money that's coming rushing in. Great. But those are just, zoomed out numbers, zoomed out things happening around your campaign. So it's always best to go to your own data, to your own strategy. Think about what you can adjust, because that's really where you're going to control things at the end of the day and drive that more efficient campaign, regardless of what's happening around you.
And then last thing here is something we shouted out last time is that it's interesting what we just talked about. Optimization's pulling all these levers. Those levers are of different shape, size, and color, depending on the social platform, depending on a certain audience that we're going after. So again, you do need an expert in the seat to drive those levers and controls across all channels, across all tactics, across all audience.
Right.
And again, a partner like Brkthru is certainly ready and willing to help any of our clients, political or non-political, navigate the next couple months. So, I mean, again, that's kind of the big message here as well.
Definitely. Well, I'm glad we got to revisit this. I'm excited to see what happens after this conversation. Hopefully no more huge changes like we had between our last call and this call, but this was really, really interesting. Thank you for taking the time.
No, thank you as well. And I don't want to make any predictions, but if something else happens, we may be back for an episode 3. And I think you and I both are not expecting that. But at this point,
No.
Last time we ended our last episode, we didn't expect those changes. So anyway, thank you again, Morgan, for all the conversation. It's been very helpful, been very insightful into the political advertising landscape ahead. So again, thank you guys for tuning in to another 30 Minutes with Brkthru. Stay tuned for the next one.
Morgan and Matt, thanks again for bringing us up to speed on what's going to be a tense close to the 2024 political season for all advertisers and agencies. We're happy you viewed this 30 Minutes with Brkthru podcast. Let us know if you found it valuable, and reach out to have a conversation with Brkthru about your campaigns and any other opportunity in paid digital media. Check out our LinkedIn page and website blog for future podcasts and those that are available. And let us know if you have an idea or a question yourself that you'd like us to cover.